Hello everyone, and in this video we are going to be talking about spinal curvature development and disorders. And so if we look at a baby in its mother's womb, we're going to note that the baby's in this fetal position where it's really hunched over, and so this is what we are going to refer to as a kyphotic curve. And so this curvature right here that's literally just like a C is called kyphotic. I will try to spell this correctly. Kyphotic curvature. And so because it exists prior to you even being born, sometimes we'll see this referred to as primary curvature. And so the key thing to make note of with your primary curvature is that this will go on in your mature spinal structure to become your thoracic vertebra. So that's going to be, I'll apologize for writing on the baby's head, but T1 through T12. And then it's also going to form the pelvic vertebra. And so this could be things like your sacrum or your sacral, so that'd be like S1 through S5. And so these guys we refer to as primary curvatures because that's what exists when you came out of your mother's womb. Now, as a baby, you're going to be crawling around and you're going to want to see what you're crawling towards, so you're going to lift up your head. And so as babies lift up their heads, what's happening is that it's going against the grain of that primary curvature that existed out of the mother's womb. And so instead of a kyphotic curve, what we're now going to see is this thing that we refer to as a lordotic curve. And lordotic is another way of saying secondary curvature because this is stuff that only came into being after you left your mother's womb. And so as babies lift up their heads, they're developing their cervical region of their spine. This would be C1 through C7 of the vertebra. And then in addition to that, as babies stand up in toddlers to start walking around, that's when they start bearing a lot more weight, and they're going to develop their actual lumbar spine to support all that weight on that low back. And so another example of the secondary or lordotic curvature is seen right here, and that is forming your lumbar spine, L1 through L5. And so these are the key terms you're going to see a lot. High yield terms are going to be lordotic, kyphotic, primary curvature, secondary curvature, referring to whether or not you had this at birth or developed it as you crawled around and began to walk. So with that out of the way, we're now going to look at the types of diseases or disorders that can become apparent with all this stuff. So the key thing to note here is that we have a thing called scoliosis. And so with scoliosis, we're not looking at the side views anymore. So we're not really looking at that fetal position. What we are looking at is how something deviates from that midline. And so if we're looking at this from the frontal plane, the anterior or the posterior view, if we're seeing any lateral deviations of the spine, that is what we are going to define as scoliosis, is kind of this lateral bending of the spine away from its midline. And I'll just kind of write that out so we got any lateral bending and then frontal plane. I apologize for the screen here. In the frontal plane. Okay, and so the other type of disorder that can exist in the spine is something referred to as kyphosis. And so kyphosis is basically this thing, you can see it happen in elderly people or people who begin to kind of hunch back over into that fetal position. They kind of regain or begin to emphasize all of that primary curvature is termed kyphosis. So you're exaggerating the kyphotic curvature in that spine. So the stuff that you originally had as a fetus, you're getting that back in an even more dramatic way. And so the kyphotic curvatures, those are going to be your your thoracic region as well as your sacral region. And so those areas can become more pronounced. Generally, it's probably going to be in the thorax, which is this guy right here. So T1 through T12 are going to be the specific vertebrae that are actually taking on an additional sharper curve than they were normally. And so the final thing we're going to be looking at here is what's called the lordosis. And so lordosis is when you're emphasizing your lordotic curves or those secondary curves. And so these are what happens with people who begin to like lean back a lot, and that becomes like their natural position. And so with these, you can see the emphasis right now in the L1 through L5 vertebra of the spine. Basically, the apex of that curve is becoming much more posterior than it's normally should. And so these are the types of disorders that we can see and how the spine develops. I hope this is helpful. Thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, I'll talk to you guys next time.